classroom. Yeah.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia hui mai hei. Welcome to this meeting of the Environmental Science and Policy Committee. I'd just like Edward to start us off with a karakia.
Kia ora tātou. Aki ai ki te tangi a te manu nei, mā tui a I rongo, tui a I raro, tui a I roto, tui a I waho. Tui te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, tui te muka takata I a waiki nui, a waiki ro, a waiki pamamao, whānau haramai te toki haumi e hui e, tai ki e. And as you all know, that karakia talks about uniting, combining, working together, seeking common outcome.
Thank you, Edward. Just so we're aware, also we're streaming live, and we have on. We had Gary, I think. Gary, yeah. Okay. I'd just like to take this opportunity right now to just it's a big day. It's a watershed moment really, where we've got our environmental science and policy committee, where we have our two iwi reps, which we confirmed yesterday at our main council meeting. And the two reps, first one, I'd just like to mention first of all Karen Coote, who has an apology into this meeting. She represents the Mauraki area, and Karen comes with a really big governance background, and so she's got a lot of skills. Fortunately, at times not quite right for her to be at this meeting, but we'll be looking forward to officially welcoming her at our next meeting. We'd also like to make special mention. We have Edward with us today. Edward actually reflects the mana to mana that Otago Regional Council is building up the local iwis. Edward's been involved in and around ORC for a lot longer than I have, obviously, for a very long time, and he's been instrumental in providing support to developing policy for advising to supporting policy for the council. I'm sure Edward has seen a partnership develop over the time from his time to start, whereas now I believe we're getting to the stage we're starting to create a partnership where we're becoming one, and which is where we need to be, a partnership which would become inseparable basically. And I think it's really quite fitting that Edward has got the honour. Edward's got the honour of co-chairing this committee with myself. So I certainly look forward to working with you, Edward, and as a committee we look forward to having your input and Karen's input as we move forward in the policy area, science and policy area. So I think we just welcome. Oh my, ori mai. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor McCall, co-chair. Kia ora. Thank you for welcome to both Karen and I. Yes, so there's continue to build on that partnership that you refer to. We have been working with the Regional Council, the local Runaka and Kaitahu, probably since about 1992. And so I've been very much a part of that process. And I think in recent years, I think that has really moved forward very strongly. So more toward a true partnership. So I'm pleased to be able to accept this role on the committee and work with you all in building our pathway forward and for those outcomes that we're all trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. Awesome. Apologies. Karen, do we have any other apologies? Brian, thank you. Someone like to move the apologies. Thanks, Alexa. Gretchen, all in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Public forum. I don't believe we have anybody coming to the public forum. Confirmation of agenda. I think I'd like to move a motion that we change the agenda. We have a set, and I'll I think there's been an email go around notifying everybody of this, but we're going to change the agenda order from what was in your papers to, we're going to start off with the estuary SOE monitoring paper. And then we're going to go to the vulnerable ecosystems, water quality state and trend, annual water quality and bio monitoring results, contact recreation report, then the air plan review, and we'll finish off with the Otago Lakes management approach.
The minutes coming.
Sorry.
Minutes.
Yes, next. Yeah. No, we just. I suppose I think we have to move that change to the agenda. I understand. So I'm happy to move it. And Richard will second it for us. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, as normal practice, we're all aware that we have any interest to any particular paper, which I doubt will be. We need to declare that. And the next one, confirmation of the minutes, to the minutes of the last meeting. So confirmation. We've all had and read the minutes of the last policy meeting. Somebody like to, whether they be confirmed?
Yep.
Thanks, Gretchen. Thanks, Tom. All those in favour?
Aye.
Any matters for consideration coming out? Any matters arising from those minutes? No. Thank you. So we might move into the main body of our report. I just, right at the beginning, we've got a pretty full agenda. We've got 7 papers to get through in 2 hours, or not too much more than 2 hours. So I just would, I just like everybody, as we go through the papers, to have your questions at the ready, have them clear and concise, and we'll probably just have pretty much one question go round before we go for follow-up questions, because otherwise we'll be here till midnight. So that'll be really good. So first of all, we just got Tom's going to introduce the paper. So the first paper is Estuary State of Environment Monitoring Program, and you'll have Sam with us. Welcome, Sam, and Anita and Tom. So I'll just let you introduce the paper, and we'll take some.
Cool. Kia ora, and thank you, Lloyd. Just introducing this paper, and sorry about the many changes to the agenda. I know that creates a bit of confusion, but we think this is probably the best way to get through the day without too much confusion. This paper covers our SOE monitoring program for estuaries to date. It's a new program, and Sam will run you through some of the details of that, and then we'll get into questions.
Cool. Okay, so it's essentially just an update of where we're sitting in the monitoring program, building towards to be able to start producing trend reports. And so as of the summer just been, we now have a current state map for every estuary in Otago now, which is great, other than Hooper's Inlet, which we couldn't because of the tide draining, wasn't draining enough to actually get out to walk around the estuary. But that will build towards, in the next year we're going to have estuary program review to kind of go through everything and work out how often we sort of will monitor each of the estuaries and with what methods. So to kind of get to where we are, basically, that when I say there's a current state with broad scale mapping, which is essentially mapping the habitat of the estuary, which allows you to determine kind of like percentage mud and if it's degraded based on if there's nuisance of macroalgae or a large amount of mud content across the estuary. And some estuaries will then go on to set up fine scale sites in to allow for long-term detection and change in mud in the estuary. Or some of them which are in a relatively good state, we might have just put some sediment plates in, or we're happy with every 5 to 10 years going back for broad scale. And so the next year will be good because we'll have our first trends report we'll be able to produce as well, which will be Catlins, Shag River Estuary and Waikouete will be 5 years of, 3 years of a baseline gathered in 2016 when Rachel commissioned the work, and this will follow up to kind of 5 years later what's happening in those estuaries. And so that will really help inform the kind of program reviews, sort of determine what's next, because we're trying to move away from, we still need the SOE monitoring to continue to know what's happening in the estuary, but I'm trying to move towards actually also more investigation, so estuaries which have problems, rather than just monitoring and keeping on saying the problem's the same, to actually follow up with like what is happening in the catchment to make this estuary more degraded, whether it's a more bespoke nutrient model or a sediment study or change in land use, which might illuminate why the estuary is in its state. So that'll be a big part of the program review next year. But yeah, essentially this paper's showing the last 2 financial years, we've finally got state for all the estuaries, and the program's running quite nicely, and we'll review it next year, basically, is the gist of the paper. Plus, there's obviously a few reports. I know, apologies for the large amount of papers in there. I did notice that, but that's basically the reports from Salt Ecology who did the work. So for the 4 estuaries, broad scale maps last year, and I think there was a fine scale report or 2 in there, and some sediment plate reports. So, and some of the review also is actually to address that kind of large amount of data in the reports. We're trying to work on making them a bit more user friendly. They're great for myself. I like the detail, but we're trying to get it a bit where, part of that is to also look at how we maybe make the reports less, I suppose, full of content and just more key points to summarize. So that's going to be part of what we look at, and also getting them up on the webpage is the other thing I'm up to.
So this is starting to see the investment in the science that council made a commitment to in this LTP, and now you're starting to see some of the outputs of that. So that's really good. And this is one of our level of services to be presented by the end of June. So look at fortuitously.
Yeah, so thank you, Sam. I was just going to mention what Anita said. There's awesome background stuff that you guys are doing, setting the benchmark somewhere for us to start. So it's really good. So we'll take questions, and we have Kate.
Thank you. It is great to see that work. I suppose most of these reports are dated 2022 or earlier, and we've got some really neat community groups working out in these areas already. It's 2 parts to this question: is have they been given some of the stuff because they're working in that field, and or how do we not just put it up on our website but make sure it shoots out and is built into and is used by those community groups working? And and the small question, which isn't really important, is why is it taking so long to get these out? Because if those community groups would have liked them earlier.
Some of the community groups have had them, have got them, the ones who sort of interested. Like I went up and talked with Noslam, for example, or the Kakanui, which I don't think is actually in this, but that was a similar thing where they so there has been a few groups come towards and ask, and so they've all got the reports. I suppose it's in terms of getting them on the webpage is the first step, I suppose, and then from there, I'm not sure what's the best way of getting that to the communities.
So we can connect up with Libby's team to.
I think it's really important that we don't own these.
Yeah.
They have been,
Oh, yeah,
as part
yeah.
of investment and giving it back.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Tim?
Yeah, so just, I guess it's a fairly general sort of question. What are your main concerns in regards to estuaries? And is there any particular estuary that is more concerning than the others?
Probably it varies from catchment to catchment in terms of the issue, the concern. But I mean, the 2 biggest stresses are generally sediment and nutrients. Probably the estuaries which are probably and not as great at health would be the Catlins estuary and the Pleasant River estuary. I've got some sediment issues, and there's a bit of a variation in between in some of the others. We've got some really good estuaries in Otago still, in the Catlins, not the Catlins estuary, but the other ones in the Catlins. But yeah, sediment and nutrients are probably the 2 biggest stresses, and it kind of varies. Some of the estuaries are more just sediment problems. For example, like Akatori is probably a more sediment issues. It doesn't have the nuisance macroalgae, whereas estuaries like the Catlins have a bit of both.
Yeah. And is that a concern for Kaimoana and that sort of thing? Is it?
It does, yeah. When it gets smothered with nuisance algae, there's not a lot beneath it. It's sort of anoxic to the surface, and mud can be kind of up to your knees sort of thing in those areas. So it is, yeah, it's a bit of an issue where it starts occurring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just,
Yeah, probably a follow-up to that. So the ones you've stated there, is there already things in motion, or is there opportunities to improve those conditions?
Yeah, there will be through, well, hopefully with the land and water plan will help address some of those issues as well. But the Catlins, for example, is where some follow-up work we need to have to kind of understand it because of the two rivers feeding into it. It's sort of, there's an element of, it's always hard to know exactly what's legacy in terms of, you know, as a lot of that mud came, you know, from sort of 50, 60 years ago clearing, and how much is modern. So it's this sort of one-off snapshot. The Catlins is the one which we have a state trend next year. It's only 5 years, so it's not amazing state trend, but at least it might give a bit of an indication. But yeah, it's the other ones kind of, it'll be land and water plan sort of management. Basically, management of land use will help improve it. It will be a lot, you won't necessarily see it, and you know, there's a lot of lag time from, you know, trying to mitigations to what's happening. But I mean, you can measure it, and what you're doing in the catchment is a good indicator. Like, you know, if you fence and plant, for example, or improve forestry management, for example, that will reduce it. You might not necessarily see the results straight away, but there's definitely they can be improved.
And Sam also talked about moving into that more investigative work, so we can actually identify our problem mysteries and then start to understand. That's obviously an LTP and a funding conversation, so how much and where. So you'll see that as we start building the next LTP.
thank you. You happy, Richard? My quick question was just in the lack of receding tide meant that you can only measure sediment. This is on the Hoopers.
Yeah.
Is that because what you're saying there is because the tide didn't go out far enough to have a beach?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's you're naturally sort of
That's
constricted, and we could only map the salt marsh because
Yeah.
of course it's out of the water. But yeah, we couldn't walk across the estuary.
So it's quite natural.
Yeah, I'm not 100%. Yeah, it is natural. Yeah, there's not anybody opening or closing that one, but yeah, I'm not sure the time frames are like when it opens and closes in terms of how.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Weather events, caused by weather events.
weather events. Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
yeah.
I think
Was the last one 10 years ago? Someone was saying, or 12 years ago, it kind of constricted, and then it sort of blew out, and now it's constricted again.
Okay,
From memory. Yeah.
that's awesome. Do we have any other questions? If not, Sam, thank you very much for the sterling work that you're doing. You're setting, you're getting good background information. So there's knowledge is power. So that's excellent. Well done.
Thank you.
Happy
Move
to move those
yeah.
recommendations still.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
It's
good to
2 and 3.
I've gone right past all that. Sorry.
Yeah.
There you go. So Kevin's moved the recommendations as per the report. Do we have a second? Thanks, Tom. All those in favour, please say aye.
We're on
Derek.
7.5, page 348.
Aye. Michael, welcome. We note that you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just for clarity, we're now at page 348, item 7.5. Dr. Jarvie, not Dr. Willis, as he was introduced in Valpoika by me.
Thank you very much. So welcome. Welcome, Mr. Jarvie, Scott. Yeah. So this is the paper that really this paper really sort of intrigued me a little bit. Salt plains, etc. So thank you very much. We'll just let you introduce your paper and take it from there.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. So this paper documents some of the work currently underway in the biodiversity area, and specifically with that focus on terrestrial ecology. I describe a bit about how we have such diverse ecosystems, including these naturally uncommon ecosystems, and they are those ecosystems defined as having less than 0.05% of the terrestrial land area in Aotearoa. So they're often small, or can be a bit larger and widespread, with little scattered pockets elsewhere. I describe a bit about the rationale for the development of these programs under the Resource Management Act, and that's basically because we're here under section 6C and 30 to maintain and protect biodiversity. And these ecosystems do contribute enormously to biodiversity in the Otago region. And I talk about the development for two of these ecosystems. So the two that I selected, and this was working with leading experts in the field, was the inland salines and the coastal turfs. The rationale for the inland salines is that they are only found in the Otago region. They have declined in extent from about 40,000 hectares and estimated to about 100 hectares since the 1960s. So that's about 0.025% of the area that they were only a bit over 60 years ago. So that's quite dramatic. And they have very distinctive and specialized flora and fauna, so the plants and animals in them. And they generally only occur in those ecosystems or by the coast. They can have a disjunct range and they're found there because of their salt tolerance, which is quite intriguing. So working with these experts, we developed a bit of a monitoring program because people generally approach this sort of work with these naturally uncommon ecosystems from a biological perspective, when often these are there because of the geology. So the abiotic drivers behind them. And we've only just established it. We're 1 year in, but just like you said earlier, we're here about establishing baselines. So we've got something to compare to. And fortunately, being determined by abiotic drivers more along the non-living components, we can actually get some attributes and limits that we can work towards seeing about what we need to have a ecosystem that has integrity. The other ecosystem that I looked at was the coastal turfs, and that was primarily because there's only 18 of them in the Otago that have been identified. The only examples on the east coast of the South Island. 86% of them nationally are outside of protected areas, and they are critically endangered. And when I say critically endangered, like the inland salines, that's the highest risk of extinction. These are barely hanging on both these types of ecosystems, and they've severely degraded. This was again working with experts who have had extensive experience, and they've brought a unique perspective into how to develop the monitoring program. And it's exciting to see the work that's already been collected in this first year. Very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Scott, have we got any questions for Scott? Let's go.
Again, one part is working with the community where these areas are found and what they can do, but work to restore. I mean, that was quite phenomenal, the figure of the inland saline salt pan ecosystem, but also understanding where that is with the community. As we get catchment groups going out, getting that sort of data is really hard for people to understand what it looks like and where it is. And I think it's really important to remember that anyone perhaps harming them may well be doing it from ignorance rather than from desire. And yeah, it's just really hard to get that information out there. So again, how are you looking at working with the community where these are found?
Yeah, that's
just over the hill from me.
Great. Oh, sorry. That's a great question. We're already starting to work with the community through landowners and the QE2 Trust, as well as the Department of Conservation in certain locations. And there is an idea to do, following on from your suggestion with the report on the reptiles, maybe doing a user guide to describe these ecosystems that we have in Otago and how we can identify them, because often they are hard and they're not that well defined, and how we can start to restore them in certain cases. And there has been some amazing work done in the last 3 years on how to start to restore these inland salines particularly. And there are some proposals on potentially doing a resolution, I only found this out yesterday, to maybe work on one of our most threatened vascular plants that's only now found in 3 locations, including one of these inland salines.
So can I ask another question? I know you said we're limited to one. So this is exciting me. So can I just understand the resourcing? Maybe it's a question for you, Richard. Is it as we find this stuff, getting it out there, we've got some really good connected community catchment groups that are often looking for A, speakers, or B, people just wanting to get the stuff. It's not cheap if you hire an ecologist, but if someone sees your guide, rings up, what can we do about it? And because that's a resourcing question we need to be considering.
Question.
Can I say, we don't have the resources for Scott to go out every time someone sees something. We do a bit of ground truthing through our wetlands program, but
We do, and at the moment, we kind of recognise that we're in the infancy of these types of programs. So another similar setting is the wetland space, and we get calls all the time, and just kind of prioritise them as we can, and where we can help by either a site visit that ties in with something else, or just a phone call. We do. We certainly don't just turn people away. However, we're certainly not resourced to be able to provide that proactive or even really responsive service to people in this space. And I think it's something to think about.
There's two parts. That's a good question. There's the physical, have we got resource to go, which is obviously we should call it the more expensive option that we sent it. And the other one is, with all this great information we're starting to collect, how do we turn into something that's easily digestible, so it doesn't necessarily need that expert to explain it, so that the community can pick it up off the website, or we can distribute it through catchment groups, and it gives them a really good understanding, I guess at a layperson level, for want of a better term. So that we have made some investment in that space just to test it, using a partnership with the museum and science communication, but it's something we're thinking about, how do we do that on a broader scale?
Yeah, and at this stage, that's certainly what we're prioritising. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting journey, because the more we create and the more awareness we create, the more demand there is for information and for bespoke information.
It was a similar question here, so all good.
Thank you, Tim.
Just a question, Scott, around the main causes of degradation. What's happening?
For what? For the ecosystem?
Yeah.
Which one? The inline saline or the coastal turf?
Yeah.
Okay, so for coastal turf, the environmental degradation in the past, it would have been land use change. Now it's more a combination of land use change and stress by weeds and incursion into them. Yep. So just rank grasses. And then for that was the inland thing, and then for the coastal turf, it would be the rank grasses. Yep. The coastal turfs are like small herbaceous communities, quite low lying.
Are these introduced weeds we're talking about?
Correct. Yeah. And they'll just smother them. The coastal turfs are mainly there because they're right by the coast edges, and with the amount of salt spray and the disturbance that they bring, and probably former bird communities that would have grazed them down to low level, that would have maintained them in the past. With those going, they're increasingly being threatened.
Well, perhaps we could move some geese from Tomahawk.
Yeah, that's all good. Edward?
Just under the strategic framework and policy considerations, refer to the biodiversity strategy 2018. Is that a regional council strategy, or?
That came out with the OSA, yes, correct.
Oh, right. And same for the action plan below it.
Correct.
All right.
Yeah, any other questions? Elliot?
Yeah, I was just found this all very interesting, and I was wondering about the other ecosystems that was mentioned, like the inland outwash gravels, and if they were less critically endangered, which is why we haven't done those yet, or they're just further down the line, or?
It will have to be a discussion around how many that we will get to. We do have at least 38 in Otago of the naturally uncommon ecosystems identified by Manaaki Whenua. I suspect that we have more. I actually do think that I had a workshop recently with some leading experts, and we are likely the most biodiverse region for species and ecosystems across the Motu. And these ones are only just one type of classification of ecosystems. Then we've got other ecosystems that were that are now naturally uncommon. So they used to be once common and they're now rare. So they'll be like alluvial river flats. We've got those big stands of trees. And then we've got our more common ecosystems. And then we've got those highly modified ecosystems like the dryland environments. And many of these are threatened as well. So it's working through how to do this in a systematic way. But I did print off a list of what's identified from Manaaki Whenua, and I can provide that to you and work through it. But the idea is that I would like to, with the support of the council, work through other ecosystems that are threatened like that and do contribute so enormously to biodiversity. And yeah.
It's got to start somewhere, I think.
Richard?
Yeah, it might be an unfair question and it might be one for ourselves, but I think I think you've kind of answered it there, which was have we got a strategy for how we're going to monitor biodiversity across Otago? We've got here the threatened, the rare ecosystems, some of which are threatened. And yeah, you've described that even managing to get to those and monitor them in a systematic way is something we're still working on. But have we got a program to systematically work out how, and we're going to need to be able to understand that for, I guess, resourcing LTP. So yeah, how are we doing something like that?
Can I answer that one? You might recall yesterday you saw a level of service measure in Richard's report around the biodiversity monitoring program that wasn't delivered because of the MPSIB. So once the MPSIB lands, there will be a bigger piece of work that will look at how we monitor collectively and how we prioritise and things like that. So it is coming. We're just sort of waiting for that preeminent legislation to assist us.
Awesome. Any other questions? If not, we'll go to the recommendations. If someone would like to move the recommendations to note the chair, the three, Andrew and Alexa. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you very much, Scott, for your work, and we look forward to it. It's always interesting. You always have an interesting story for us whenever you come. Thank you very much. I think we're moving on now to water quality state and trend, which I think will be on page 557.
Yeah, this is the one that Kylie circulated. The covering paper didn't quite make it into the agenda, so it was circulated at lunchtime
Today.
today.
Okay, so 557. Oh, something's happened to Rachel.
It's morphed into.
I'm Rachel today.
I'm assuming you've all met Jason. I'm not sure. Jason Oxberger, Hugo Borges, and Emile Levy. So they're water quality, lakes, and groundwater specialists. Rachel's unwell, unfortunately. So these four gentlemen are going to do their best to work through any questions you might have that Rachel otherwise would have answered.
Can't take it as read though.
No.
So this is a paper for noting, so we'll leave you take it away, Tom and Co.
Yeah, sure. I'll just quickly start by acknowledging that there's 3 water quality papers on the agenda today, and we've put them in an order, I guess, befitting their importance. So State and Trends is the first paper. As was mentioned before, there was the covering paper was sent around today and managed to fall out of the agenda. But the main body of the report has been in your agenda since it was sent out. The main body of the report is the important part. And it covers state and trends across water quality, state and trends across lakes, rivers and groundwater systems in Otago. It talks to trends, and trends are our important indicator of long-term change, and that's certainly where we as a team put our most reliance on. So certainly that'd be the one I'd encourage you to focus on. Second report looks at an annual report card, which reports the results of the last year in a shorter term context, and it's something that we're required to report on, and so therefore delivered that. And the other report is a contact recreation paper, which is a slightly different focus. But so yeah, we'd be happy to open up to questions, I think, or with a little intro from Jason as well.
One other thing to consider for those of you who were in the space in 2020, either on the council or just tuning into water quality presentations. This one's actually in cycle. So we delivered a state and trends report in 2020 in response to a number of plan changes going through at the time, which were 7 and 8, as well as a shift in how trends were analyzed, and that switched to a probabilistic method, which has resulted in the somewhat complex language, but more nuanced language you'll see here. And to align with the start of the plan review, whereas this is sort of more in line with the end of the planning process. So this is actually on schedule in that we did one in 2017. We had a sort of interim one in 2020, and now there's this one back on schedule in 2022. So that's why they're coming out so often. Generally, they come out every 5 years because there won't be a massive change between this one and the one in 2020.
Wasn't dreaming.
No, you were not dreaming. They are coming out quite rapidly at the moment.
No, that's very good. So it's a pretty comprehensive report. So have we got any questions? People will have one? Okay, please have one.
Why don't I do it? And I can't find it. There has been a lot of reading, and I'm not going to find it straight away. Sorry. But where you do the DNA tracking on E. coli, and there was some info. I think it's in this report on ruminant. Is it not in this one?
It's in the contact reg paper.
Oh, it's only on contact. Yeah, sorry.
Where the sun is
Waiting.
you don't notice one very well.
Any other questions? Oh, thanks, Edward.
Trying to find it, but it was something to do with the arsenic in the Catlin paper, which was not connected to the schist, I don't think, territory. So have you got any clues as to where that's coming from?
Nothing evident, but I think potentially from organic material. Yeah, it's quite a deep bore, and again, it's got, from memory, low oxygen as well, which is when it gets mobilized.
Bit of an outlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite consistent in that bore, but yeah, we only got two. We are actually drilling new bores in the Catlins at the moment, but that's the only bore in the Catlins that we have got at the moment. So yeah, so it's quite hard to.
But it's quite common inland.
Yeah, especially in central. Yeah.
Yeah, so as Amir said, there's 2 more bores being installed as we speak, I think, in the Catlins, which will help to provide a bit more of a representative picture. But yeah, as he said, that one bore does seem to pick up arsenic very good.
Yep, thanks. Anything else? No, I've got some.
No, just a question around the you're mentioning that the trends are showing some improvements over a period of time. Can you explain why we're seeing an improvement? Is it because of the work that's been done 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or how is that happening?
All of the above. So when you look at 10-year trends, you'll generally see more improvement than you'll see in something like a 20-year trend. Part of that will be on-farm, on-land changes in practice that are leading to an improvement. And part of it may just be natural climate variation, and that we've swung into a better period, so to speak. And that may naturally swing back the other way. And it's actually really hard to divide up what aspect is what without knowing exactly what's occurred on ground, which the land team will be doing, helping us flesh that out in more detail in the future. But it's certainly, there are definitely some winds occurring, and those do bear out in the 10-year trend, but the entire improvement in that trend may not necessarily be due to those improvements. There may be some natural variation occurring as well.
So is this something we can shout out as a success?
Aspects of the 10-year trend, you can certainly shout it as a success.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Could I just read a piece of the executive summary? Well, it depends which one you're on page. What's the very first, the first piece of writing on the page? Oh, yeah, well, it's been sent to.
There you
I think
So basically what I'm going to say here is, I'm just going to read this out because I can, because I'm sitting up here. Where is it? It's gone. Tribute to the lower Clutha Rohi show many extremely likely or virtually certain improvements across multiple attributes over a 10-year period. This Rohi is intensively farmed, is characterised as having high rainfall and heavy soils compared with other FMU Rohi in the region, and is therefore extensively drained. Catchment groups have been working in the area for 10 plus years. The improving water quality may be due to increased awareness and on-the-ground action promoted through farmer-led groups. And to have that couple of sentences at the heart of a science paper just does makes my heart beat, which is awesome. So that was going to lead into my question, because obviously I'm relatively familiar what's happening in that zone, but okay, there's some overall good improvements in 10 years, but not always over 20 years. So can you sort of just give us a wee bit about the difference between a 10-year and 20-year trends?
so. You can think of it as a bit of momentum. A 20-year trend, you're starting from quite a long time ago. So if you were degrading, you're carrying that good period that had previously degraded. So when you start coming back up, that line still slopes down for quite some time. So it's got momentum that's quite hard to reverse the overall direction of that trend. So if it was quite steep, you'll still see degrading numbers, but you'll slowly be less degrading on that 20-year trend as it comes up. Whereas a 10-year period is going to be more responsive, but more vulnerable to things like natural climate variability. So we start having to be a little bit cautious with how we interpret those as you go. So we tend to rely on 20 years for overall patterns. And then if we've got good reason, like we understand what's happening on the ground, there's substantial change, then we'll start looking at those 10-year trends with a bit more context around them.
Yeah, that's awesome. My other question is, so historically the state of environment monitoring has been done on 80% of 5-year averages, but I think this paper is done under the new N differently. Can you just explain that to us?
Yep, so there's the Schedule 15 compliance, which is with the water plan and Plan Change 6A, which is generally reported in annual report cards, whereas this is in the new and 2017 NPS framework, to be fair, reporting against the objective bands present in that policy statement. So this is effectively standardized national reporting, in that we have to report on those tables every 5 years. We've got to report on state and trends every 5 years. And the trends are also done in a nationally standard way. So this is pretty consistent with what you would expect from national type reporting.
So does that mean so you do monthly testing?
Yep.
Is that not flow dependent? Because historically they've done minimum median.
Yeah, so the
flow and low.
NPS is not below median flow. The
So it's
NPS
just any
is
flow?
60 across the board. However, if you look at how those limits correlate, which is a bit loose because it depends on the site, but these in raw number would be more permissive than Schedule 15, but that's because they are across the entire flow regime. So they're actually somewhat aligned, but it does depend a wee bit.
Maybe. Well, because when you're doing your state and trends, particularly around E. coli and I think nitrates, we got the 95 percentile measure. Which, can you explain that? So that's, can you explain that? Because so people know, because this is quite new. And
yep. So percentile, if you've got 60 samples, if five samples exceed that, you will fail, or you will fall down the bands as such, which is quite a high bar. And you do actually see quite a lot of variability in those sorts of measures because you're relying on 5 samples. And it's in the NPS and we have to report against it. And we do have to achieve the bottom line, which means we have to be above the D band for those things. In terms of how I would interpret that, if your median falls below the national bottom line, that would be a more serious issue than your 95th. You still need to work on that 95th, which tends to come from high flow sampling. So you need to reduce E. coli getting in at high flows. But if your median is worse, that would be a worse place to be than if it's just your 95th.
So if you've had D band readings,
yep,
in the last like 5 of the last 6 months,
yep,
you can't change bands until 5 years' time.
That's correct. Yep.
So you can't get an improvement in bands because it's actually impossible for 5 years if you've depending on the testing regime.
Yep.
And that I think it's the same for triple N as well. So there's a triple N standard, I think is there. Is that a 90?
There is, that's quite high. So there's multiple forms of N that we'll need to set in the new land and water plan. The triple N and the NPS is toxicity, which is where you start having impacts on invertebrates and their ability to survive more or less. Whereas eutrophication or algal growth would require much lower nitrogen levels. So generally we won't tend to breach triple N bottom line, which is the bottom of the B band in the NPS.
Yeah, no, that's I'm full of questions, but I'll go with
Yeah, but just subsequent to that, so that's on our 5-year trend.
5-year score.
Yeah. So we could, but we're testing regularly within. So if we have had that hiccup in an area, we would show each year that whatever way that was going, whether it was.
So
I know your band won't change, but we could get some idea that we've had let's say we've had a spillage of something that's caused a hell of a muck for 5 months, and we've got 5 bad marks, so we go into red. But from then we've fixed that issue, and actually we're starting to see an upward trend. I still can't change my band, but.
So 5 samples on your trend, like a 10-year or 20-year trend, will not change your trend significantly. So it won't. 5 samples alone will not make your trend look like it's degrading all of a sudden. If your trend is improving and you have 5 bad samples and that's it, you'll be all right.
Right.
But for NOF reporting, it's a very national standard way, so we do have to report that it would miss that band. Yep.
Thank you.
Good. This is like this to me is like balance sheets to Nick. Oh, we got any other questions? We got any online? We're all good. Edward, thank you.
Thanks. Look, there's the Apatari is talking about the potential for groups, catchment groups, but on Lloyd's line as well. And you mentioned the Apatari Y, the work they're doing, and you mentioned that Jobs for Nature group working up there. Is that likely to influence trends here or?
Yep, absolutely. So all the on-farm stuff going on across the region, and it is many and varied, I would say. But all of that is likely to flow through. The trick with that is we don't necessarily know our lag times in Otago, but they tend to be somewhere between 7 and 12 years nationally, and we'd be reasonably consistent with that. So we wouldn't necessarily expect in stream to start picking up those changes for 7 to 12 years. So that's where it's quite important for us as a council and for community groups to understand things like meters fenced and riparian margins that they put in place as sort of interim metrics that they can say this has occurred, so we expect a change. And then when it comes through in that time period, then we say, oh, of course, there's the change. Great. That makes sense.
Well, you got to follow up.
Just to follow up. So I suppose that then if we have got a degraded area that we are working on to fix, that it's very important to let people know that fix it or what is happening to show that we are actually trying to, we're making the effort to fix things.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take some time for
slow scientists. It can get disheartening when you change things and you don't immediately get a response. So that is a bummer.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, apologies, but Edward opened up the opportunity, and it is a question. But I think I want to explore the merit of those catchment groups actually doing measurements that won't be done by you in those timeframes, because we're doing a regulatory thing here. We have to do it, whereas those groups are going out more frequently, more often, and doing that stuff, and can react to bad results more quickly. Is that correct? And was wondering if you've seen any cases of that happening.
Not off the top of my head, but what I will say about that is we often monitor what are called higher order, which you can just think of as bigger rivers or bigger streams, whereas catchment groups may choose to monitor smaller streams, which tend to have lower lag times, which means they're more likely to pick up the changes a wee bit quicker, which is quite good. And so there's certainly a place for that sort of monitoring and that it can be more responsive. And we may, in the future with the land and water plan, when you look to monitor trends, choose to roll out what you could consider sentinel networks or something, which do monitor those small order tribs looking for those changes in a quicker time frame.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I am aware because of our Tyra work that they found doing monitoring that meant that they reacted much more differently.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Yep.
Yeah, and it's it's being able to capture that, and I don't want to use the word citizen science, but I will, and being able to capture that and see it because it is part of that storytelling.
I just like this.
Record.
Hugo will chip in.
I will I was just going to add to that, because as an example of how things, happen from citizen science or, like data from the community, we have Tomahawk Lagoon that was not a site for us, and they've been doing for many years some studies there, collecting, bringing kids, like to collect sample, and those were the only results that we've had to start a whole movement pretty much on, how things should be changed there and what we should do. And there's a lot of momentum based on the information that they brought to our attention. Yeah.
I should also say Rachel's more engaged in that space than I am. So I'm certainly not an adequate Rachel on that question.
Well, coming from an area where the community has been monitoring their water for probably 10 years, and you can see, the trend starting to kick in. Is really good to see now the trend starting to kick in at a, proper science level. I shouldn't say proper science level, like at a, at this level. And I think, things start, because being in the game takes a while to see how the movements work, because it's like 7-10 year period. So I suppose my message, it's a proud day for me because the first time I can actually see this on a public paper, but also this one for all those catchment group people that are listening, stick in the game, because at the end of the day, if you do the mahi, you get the rewards. And that's because sometimes it's just a long time to wait, but when it comes, it feels good. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Move the recommendation, if you like.
Yeah, that would be really good. Thank you. There's only one, I think, Richard.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Tom, do you want to make one?
Could I just close by thanking the environmental monitoring team? It's something that's customary to do at the start of this presentation normally. Now, the environmental monitoring team are obviously funded by council and work internally, but they work in some beautiful but punishing conditions sometimes, and they collect all of this data day in, day out for us to be able to deliver these types of reports. We couldn't do it without them. So I just wanted to acknowledge them and say thank you.
No, that's awesome. Thank you very much. We apologise for that oversight. So we have Richard move.
Yeah.
And Elliot second to make the paper.
And can I just say something, Lloyd?
Yeah, you can, yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, it's fantastic to have this report. I'm like Lloyd and get pretty excited by these types of reports as well. They're fantastic. And they'll be really useful as we go out thinking about what to next in Otago. So yeah, a lot of work has gone in from a number of people to pull this together. And like you said as well, thinking about how easy to display this so communities can engage, because it's really, really important, like we saw the chair just talking about, for encouraging people to keep up the really fantastic work that is going on in our region. And we're starting to see some trends, and they're real trends, and that is fantastic. And also to recognise, though, that where we've had degraded sites, they still remain degraded. And it's important to say that too, as we head into a policy setting framework, that actually there are lags, but we've still got quite a bit of work to do too. And we're going to do that together. And hey, this is not about hitting people over the head here, because there's so much that's good that is going on. We can see that. It's visible. But yeah, we do, our role is that we actually have to see real change on the ground, and that's going to be tough, but we're going to do it together, and we do have to do it. So yeah, thank you very much for your work. It's really important work.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, aye?
Aye.
Thank you very much for your work. It's our sequence report. That's awesome. Next we have Rachel's supposed to stay, so there'll be
This is the wine monitoring.
So on page 301 was the large one. Annual-
305.
Sorry.
Item
305.
7.4.
Through
For those online, item 7.4.
7.4.
Yeah.
So welcome to the table. We have Hugo and Jason, and we have also Marcus. Welcome, Marcus, to the table. Thank you all for your good work, and we'll let at the end of the day, best just let you guys introduce the paper, and we'll take it from there.
I don't think this one requires any introduction. It's an annual monitoring report. It's a shorter duration summary of some of the figures that you would have seen in the last report, and some of the data collection we've done through the last report. There is some extra biomonitoring data in this one though too. So just go straight to questions.
Or we'll add one comment.
Okay, Rachel.
I was doing this paper.
NOP scores, again, they're the national reporting that we have to do. They can move about a wee bit. That's not indicative of a trend. If you want to talk about trends, please look at the prior trend report, not the individual NOP scores moving about a bit, because that does occur.
Thank you. So do we have any questions? Righty. Oh, Kevin.
And this is probably to Anita, in that if I go to paragraph 15, which talks about natural processes, and when we're setting, so we've been around our community and set our attributes, target attributes, and I just wonder how much time, or if we need to go back and reflect that with our communities about how natural occurrences will change the ability to get into their attribute states that they're aiming for. So if I'm aiming for pristine, and it is not one of the ones that get dumped out, it is say a nitrogen that's naturally occurring, that how we can correctly relate that to our community to say, well, actually, you'll never ever get the pristine because of whatever.
So through the chair, and I brought a whole lot of scientists, so I didn't get any questions, but we've taken that into account when we've set the target attribute state. So for example, we know that with that glacial flow, the fine sediments in the upper lakes catchment, that's always going to naturally occur, and we can't achieve beyond that. So that's one thing that we take into account, in the science team work really closely with the policy team to do that.
Yeah. So and I'm just thinking that one of the latest ones we went to is up the in the Maniatoto, and I can't think of the name of the bridge, but coming out of the sticks anyway, that where the river is quite black, but it is from everything that's below the tannins and that below the river. So, and again, I suppose that is a naturally occurring thing, will be exempt anyway.
Yeah, it will be reflected. I think that's an important point you raised, that not, an A band is not always pristine. Pristine can reflect a number of different values or things that are occurring in a catchment, and sometimes that means a B or a C is the best you'll get in a place for various reasons. And it's just important that we acknowledge that where we've got the information on the way through and keep communicating that with our communities.
Excellent, thank you. No science questions, sorry.
Any other questions?
I think I've only ever asked this at a workshop, which isn't a public meeting, so I'm going to do it at a public meeting once, I hope only. And that is the idea of the other things that we could be monitoring for, which is, as someone suggested, residues and microplastics, because they're both things we're not, and sometimes we wade into the rules to monitor things, which doesn't mean we haven't got a problem. And I'm just wondering, what would we have to do to affect that change if we thought it was worth doing? And I don't know if it is worth doing. I'm asking, is it something we should be monitoring?
Yeah, so we have joined with the university in the past, doing in-kind matches on things like looking for pesticides in waterways, for neonicotinoid pesticides in different studies, which often provide a snapshot. You could monitor those more regularly. It's just for a sourcing issue. And that generally when you're on to things like particularly pesticides or other things that will be really trace concentrations, the lab costs start to blow out relative to things like nitrogen, which are pretty stock standard. So you would tend to run a targeted program with an institution like the university that can reduce sampling costs, and then it becomes a project instead of a continuous thing. So that's why it tends to take the government forcing it in. But it is a resourcing question that if you want to go there, it just costs a lot of money.
Well, what about microplastics? We know they're everywhere and everywhere. Often we will be, it's cause and effect. And if we don't know it's a problem, we may not be looking for the right cause of emission. I mean, is there any consideration for anyone doing that sort of study?
Yeah, so we'll be carrying out a monitoring review over the next 12 to 18 months as the Land and Water Plan lands, and we've actually already started considering what might be in the purview of that monitoring review, how far might we go and all of that sort of thing. And certainly we are at the stage now of considering those types of questions. So should we be looking at microplastics? Where should we be looking at them? What would that look like? But it's still early days, and that we do need to do that monitoring review in a kind of in a way that covers our monitoring program in totality, so that we can get the best bang for buck and also representative data for the community. So it's but we're starting that process. Whether or not we end up in a place where we need to do that or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure we need to do it either, but I'm wondering if it's something that seems to be forever one of the biggest issues about to hit us everywhere.
Tom? Yeah, just out of all these sites that you've monitored, what's section number 95, I think. Which are the worst sites in terms of water quality?
Generally, as you go down catchments, they tend to get worse. So certainly areas of North Otago and traditionally South Otago can have more degraded water quality than out of catchment sites like the Upper Clutha.
So the Kakanuri rivers?
Yep.
It doesn't feature very well. It
Yep.
features top of the list.
Yeah.
In terms of water quality. Any others in particular?
It does depend on the attribute. So for things like periphyton, I think North Otago's not particularly flash. It looks quite bad. Whereas if you get into other attributes, it looks better.
And the correlation between the worst rivers and the cause? Got anything to do with intensification of dairy farming by any chance?
So I guess what I'd say is one of the absences in ORC science program historically has been land use and monitoring of the land use. So we're only just moving into that space now. So generally as an organisation, we can say if this activity happens, it's likely to have this effect, but we don't have that data specific to Otago. So we're building up that land program now so that we can understand a little bit more and be more targeted in terms of how we respond.
Henry?
Can I ask a planning question just to align?
On the other side of the table.
No,
how would you describe the key difference, the planning question rather than a science question, sorry, Jess. What would you describe the key difference between the existing water plan and the land and water plan in terms of what it's focused on? So I'll ask the question, I'll make it even clearer. The current water plan is a fixed base rather than activity based, and the land and water plan will be activity based. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So the land and water plan will be more holistic and look at end-to-end activities. So that's the key difference, is moving into that land space and moving into that activity space.
So the existing water plan, the permissive nature of it allows someone with a land use activity to carry out pretty much whatever they could, providing they didn't spill the adverse or negative effects beyond the boundary. Is that fair?
Yep. So the
So I thought
activities that are established around Otago are established under the planning framework that's in place at that point in time, and as it moves, and they'll need to move with it.
Excellent. Any other questions? Yep, just a minute. I just before we do that, I just want to Sal, I think it's excellent some of the way you presented some of your data with the GIS stuff on the areas, on the rocky based areas. And also the one that there's a summary one with the rivers, lakes, and percentages of at risk or not at risk ones. I think it's really good seeing new ways of presenting data, making it interesting. And I just like to make one comment, because there's one site here, it's around E. coli, and I find the new measures around E. coli. There's a site which I believe maybe in the Pomahaka has got it's got 4 different colours in the one circle. So I don't know. It's probably quite special. Do we get a balloon for that?
There's actually
Some people think theirs doesn't smell, Lloyd.
there's a good half dozen of those across the region.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of 3s, but I'd say
some 4s in North
some
Otago
4s as well in North Otago. Yeah, so that's the different measures that instead of just having one measure, now we've got 4 measures. And also the other thing I would say about this paper, around the MCI index, or the AWA, more AWA health rather than the chemical stuff. It's really good to see that stuff, and seeing that we got our baseline tests starting to come through, to get some actual data coming through with those ones as well. So well done. And we need people with the water waders on to get that sort of stuff, I believe, probably. So so it's excellent. So I'm more than happy to refine my page, and I think we've got moved. Kate seconded Elliot to note the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Again, thank you very much. Thanks, guys. It's awesome. They're not moving.
Which number are we on?
Oh, no, we're up to
Contact Rick.
I can ask that.
7.1.
We're going to start.
Yeah, that's 7.1.
We're only here by now so far, we didn't know.
Page 9.
What's the lot? 20 minutes.
I was going to say we're doing through earlier.
So 7.1, contact recreation report, and we have Marcus. We still have the same guys up the front, so that's excellent. And Tom's leading it, so we'll let you take it away.
This report looks at our results from our contact recreation season, which is for the most recent summer season. So it's actually outside of the time bounds of most of the last 2 reports that you've seen, and looks at monitoring at specific frequented recreation sites across Otago. You see this report every year. It just provides the last 12 months results, and be happy to take questions.
It's awesome. We'll take questions. Okay.
I've got my question now. I started asking before, apologies. So when you do the, I thought it was somewhere else, but when you do your testing for the eDNA, no, not eDNA, the DNA testing on the E. coli. Yeah. When it says ruminant, you can't get any more specific than that, or?
No.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's reasonably limited, sadly.
Yeah.
So it is.
It just occurred to me, some of the sites would surprise me, given I mean, there's a lot of bush clearing and stuff around there that it's not particularly intensively farmed. So it just does, yeah.
Well, so the actual number doesn't really tell you how much of it is ruminant. It just tells you that there's some ruminant input.
Yeah.
But it's hard to quantify how high it actually is. But even if it's not intensively farmed, some proportion of it might be ruminant.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we use that measure just to give us a steer as to where investigation might need to occur, or where perhaps a conversation around compliance or other bits and pieces might occur that might support better quality in the future. An example of that would be we started the site at Wanakarua this year, and actually found quite high readings of the coli, but also found that the fecal source tracking was showing that was largely avian, and that there was a gull colony roosting a bit further upstream. And so that leads you to not take any further action. But there are other
Encourage swimming or not?
we'd take further action in terms of the normal discouraging of swimming, but not
Okay.
take any further action in terms of
Trying to deal with
going to talk with farmers about their gulls.
Okay, and just going back to good practice and our role therein. So there's a site that has an issue, a community group, from a community group really vested in wanting to fix it. Are we yet in a position to be able to tell them what good looks like, or is there that connect that it's fine saying what the science is, and it's fine having an aspiration because we want everyone to swim in the waters, but our role as assisting that is limited really just to the data at the moment.
Well, no, so they might get outside the field of science who are providing data into sort of catchment advisor or compliance, depending what area. So there's a lot of good management practice, and I wouldn't. I'd also say that catchment groups, industry groups, are all in that space at the moment. So I think that possibly there's still more work to do to consolidate it into what is, because there's variations on best practice depending on who you speak to. So connecting the science information with the catchment advisor team and where they prioritise resource and how they go out and support is something that we just need to keep working on, because that's just making sure our business is well connected in terms of our business planning. But it is happening, and we do have a role to go out and use the data produced under these sort of science programs, and then have that conversation with the community about ways in which they might be able to address some of those results.
I'm asking the question in a clumsy way. I suppose when we're discussing the freshwater farm plans yesterday and the CCCV values, and people say we want to swim at this point, it's how you then engage all of those farmers along that edge to work on that and what that looks like, those actions that they take. Appreciating it may not be science, but it may be science that shows whether they're making a success. And it's just when it's about a resourcing that I'm thinking out in this for the next year and how we do that.
Yeah, and we can certainly support that type of thing with data and those conversations with all of the data we have. And if a catchment group identified a swimming space that was frequented by the community that they really wanted to enhance, that we weren't monitoring for whatever reason, then that'd be a conversation we'd be happy to have.
Thank you. Elliot?
Just looking at the map, is the main, so there's clearly a separation between the enterococci sites and the E. coli sites and the freshwater and saltwater. Is that mostly because of the is it enterococci that come from human feces as opposed to ruminant feces where you'd find E. coli? Is there a simple reason why there's that split? Yep.
E. coli, they don't last much longer in saline environments, and enterococci is the better proxy to use it, so they will last much longer. And then you can have your reference that will be the main reason why we use in those different environments different bacteria.
But the actual measurement of it rather than there's no
Yeah, it's
difference in
strictly
like
a salt
source
brush.
or anything.
Yeah.
You? Any other questions?
I'm just going to ask the same sort of question I asked before. So which river would you not take your family swimming in?
Well, I wouldn't take
Where's
it.
one?
The Ganges.
The Wanaka Graves Dam is not a great place for swimming, and that is predominantly gull input.
Yeah.
That was probably our strongest poor quality site this year, a long way.
And I think it's something that we've been always talking about as well. Like we have an issue with toxic cyanobacteria, both in rivers and lakes, and that's it's not only an Otago problem, but it's also an Otago problem. So it's very important, like to educate the community, like to identify those kind of algae, and it's dangerous for your family, for your pets, so yeah, so we're always like putting this message up there, like showing them pictures, videos of what they look like. So if they see a spot in any river across the region, because we can't monitor everywhere, that they make a smart decision, or
So the Waiala Karua at Graves, sorry, can I carry on this question? During the summer, was that a river that was signposted as not suitable for swimming?
Yes. Yeah, regularly. And I guess the other thing I'd add to the answer I gave before was within the paper too, we also outlined quite a clear correlation at many sites between rainfall and the time the sample was taken. So we see E. coli breaches after rainfall regularly, and that's that is, so it's common across all rivers, and that's why we give general advice that is if it's rained heavily, then it's best to stay out of the water for a 48-hour period.
We have Edward and then Gary.
Oh, thanks. Look, I was surprised to see Lake Waihola at the jetty is excellent, and yet above in the Taieri, the two sites above there very poor. So it must be localised where the sampling's taken, and something happening at Waihola that's keeping that water swimmable.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to say.
Yeah.
Tidal.
Well, yeah, with Waihola, it is something localized. There was reports in the past that had a lot of closures of the lake because you'd have toxic cyanobacteria blooming in the lake, and usually that's the main problem that we get with the lake. So this year, I think early in the season we had some cyanobacteria, but then it kind of cleared, which was good to see, because usually we have to shut the lake because of the blooms, and cyanobacteria is directly related to high nutrients in the water and eutrophication. Yeah, it's just with E. coli, it's not usually an issue. Yeah.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, for our agenda, our 714-page agenda, and then the extra detail we were provided at lunchtime, we've had a lot of detail, a lot of science, and then this paper and really the table one, to me is actually the one that possibly most resonates with our broader community around swimmability. Would it be fair to say, in summary, there's a couple of hotspots there, but by and large, this is a really, really good result for the 22-23 year when you look at the number of zeros there and the fares and excellence? Would that be should this be today's real good news story?
Partially. It is a good result for this summer, but as many folks in the room would well know, it was quite a dry summer with long extended spells without rain across much of the region. And as we discussed, things like rain can result in higher E. coli breedings in the swimmability program. So if you wanted to look at whether or not E. coli was actually improving, you'd have to go have a look at the trends in the trend report. But it was a good summer. I would tend to agree with that, Gary. Yep.
Okay, great. Hopefully the media will pick up on that too.
Send them a letter. Simple question again, a resourcing one for long-term plan thinking. If the community thought that they were wanting to have contact periods and wanted to know how safe they were outside of this, not necessarily just swimming, but kayaking, I think it's an example of someone written to one of my colleagues recently. about if they wanted a longer season, presumably extending the season rather than the number of sites. If there's a pet site that they wanted to know more about, well, is that something we could consider under the long-term plan, or is the team so stretched that they wouldn't be able to extend that season?
So my EM team are currently significantly oversubscribed by about 2.5 times what they should be doing. So any extension of the season will require additional resources.
And I suppose it goes back to the meaning of the swimmability. It is what contact. I think here we actually call it the contact recreation rather than swimmable. We will talk about swimmable because people fall in water, whether they intend to or not. Yeah, it would be really interesting to know what the costs would be if there were at sites over the long-term plan that people thought they used and activated.
We will, so for this long-term plan, we will look at a kind of modular estimates of, so when I say modular estimates, I mean, if you add a site with this kind of frequency, it might be this much, so that we can give you a ballpark to be able to steer you in terms of when you're asking those types of questions, what does that mean? I'm just in the process of working some of that information up with within the environmental monitoring team at the moment.
It's a good question. I mean, that's the level of service discussion around, you know, we've got some stuff we're mandated to do, and then there's some stuff that as a council you may want to do as a response to some of the community input, and we just need to make sure that we've done the work Tom's talking about to inform that discussion and give you some options.
And I suppose, and actually understanding if it would actually assist the science to understand the problem better. Because as you said, if you get a wet summer, you get very different results. But if you knew that that was the same problem all the way through the year, it may give you a different result as well. So anyway.
Thank you.
I was waiting for Alexa to ask that question.
Do we have any other
Sorry, Kate.
comments? If not, this report's for noting. Someone like to move that we note the report. Thanks, Tim. Kate, seconded. All those in favour, say aye. Again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. That was awesome. So we're moving right along to the plan review.
So that would be an email. Page 300.
This report was 7.3. It's on page 300. And it's a report to note. And also noting there's going to be another report come through. So
you'll all probably have met Sarah Harrison, who's our air quality scientist. You may not have met Vita, who started just before Easter and came from London to Dunedin on purpose, and is leading the air plan review. So we're really thrilled to have her as part of the team, and she's picked this up and is running with it. So it's really good.
that's awesome. So we'll let you take it away.
So we'll just take the paper as read. It's already featured in the ODT, so probably lots have already been said, but we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Ellen?
Saved up my questions for air. We have a 2018 air quality strategy. I'm just wondering how this plan fits with this strategy, and whether you see there's a need for quick updating of that strategy.
Yeah, sure. So through the chair, the plan when the LTP was put together was that the year plan review and the year strategy review would go hand in hand, so that they would inform each other. And so part of the team working on the year plan review is the strategy team to make sure that we've got that connection, so that review will be kicking off as well.
Okay, thank you. Carry on.
Yes.
What do you see as the best way to get public health input into, I suppose, both the plan and the strategy? I note that the strategy already says that we will assess with the help of the SDHB the impact of air quality on public health in Otago, for example. How do we get that public health input into these?
Yep. I mean, you're right to bring up public health, and it's obviously a key driver for the air plan. There has been quite a lot of research already, including by Southern Health, or SDHB. And so the issues and options paper will look at that, and we'll consider that and draw some conclusions.
The other thing I'll just note is when we did the RPS, we had some reference groups, and one of the reference groups was on air quality. We had some really a really great mix of experience in that group. So we've got some resources there that we pulled through from the RPS that we'll be able to use as well. And the District Health Board was represented on that. I think they had 2 members from memory, so we'll be able to use some of that information as well.
And they'll be consulted as well as part of the stakeholder engagement on the plan.
Thank you. One more.
No,
Can you tell us more about the implications of the recent information about motor vehicle pollution on people's health? And I suppose from that, and thinking about that Happens 3.0 study that came out last year, and how do your ideas on how you could see air quality can best be included in our public transport discussions too?
So Sarah's going to answer this one for you.
So yeah, the implications of the Happens is that there is a bit more air pollution threat from NO2 than we previously realised, like collectively as a country and almost internationally as well. The World Health Organization has updated their guidelines to lower NO2 limits as well. So, for ORC, not necessarily the air plan review, it probably means a bit more monitoring and a bit more understanding what's happening in Otago for NO2. But in terms of their plan review,
yeah, I mean, we have a working group set up for the air plan review, and we'll be talking to transport colleagues, and there'll be a bit of cross-pollination there. As Sarah said, many of the interventions might sit outside of the air plan, but we can certainly do some signposting, and there will be maybe a policy rather than a rule in the air plan on transport emissions.
Thank you very much.
I have a question just around your monitoring, because it's says that part 6 of what you monitor. See at the bottom, it's got agrochemical spray drift. Do we actually monitor for that? Is that something we could monitor?
No, that's just currently what we know one of the issues are. But yeah, quality monitoring is, Sarah has a few projects that go outside of our BAU. That's not one that we've done.
No, I'm not aware of it being a huge problem in Otago. I have talked to some people who have complained about it in the past, but compared to other regions like Hawke's Bay or like really horticultural regions, I'm not sure what what we would do for that.
No, I figured that would be the answer. So we're please, Tom.
Vita, I'm interested to know, you've come from London, obviously, and you've been here for a while now. Are there any insights that you can give us in regards to perhaps where we should be going in terms of our local situation as compared to what you've experienced in London?
In terms of air pollution?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in London before, and the issues are a little bit different. It's a lot more about transport, traffic emissions, and I can talk to you for hours about how to address traffic emissions, but also things like energy. And there is a much greater linkage, I think, between climate change and air pollution, and it's essentially the same emitters. So one of the sort of co-benefits of the air plan is that you're dealing with, the same emitters of carbon. So one of the things I would like to do with the air plan is sort of do a lot of cross-pollination and sort of, try and bring it into the round, because there's a lot that's going on in sort of different spaces, and it'd be nice to sort of just at least acknowledge that and maybe sort of bring some linkages together.
So generally, the air's better here?
Yeah, you've got a nice coastal breeze for sure.
It helps.
But I think central Otago has different issues in terms of weather conditions and things like that, which create problems. And you have wood burners here, which we don't have in the UK. So that's another issue that I'm learning about as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions? I think it's really good, and Peter's really good to have you here now, because I see like our air plan was delayed, and now we're going to get back on track, and we're still on target to deliver it on time in about 12 months' time. think that's about right, is it, Anita? Yeah.
A
So,
little bit more than that, I think.
30 June 2025.
Yeah, June 2025.
2025.
Yeah.
Yes, tons of time. No, it's excellent. So, because that's, we can, it's one of those marks that we can, going to go, not be ready anymore, going to be on track. So that's excellent. So thank you very much for your good work. And I see, and we're looking forward to our issues and options paper in October.
Yep.
So there's no more.
Right.
No
Just
more
going to move
questions?
those recommendations.
Yeah, I want someone to move, yeah. So Ellen and second Elliot. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
I'm not gonna leave. I think I'm done.
Come on. We have the lake strategy, sorry, the Targo Lakes management approach. Targo Lakes. We're going to find, and it's on page 353.
Last one. Oh, yeah.
Awesome. So, welcome to the table. Hillary, you're the only, Andrea's often at the table. Hillary, you're new to us, so welcome to the table, new to me anyway, so it's excellent. So I've got lots of notes here, but I think I might just let Andrea introduce the paper rather than myself.
Thank you. So just introducing Hilary Lennox, who's helping the strategy team with a couple of projects at the moment. We've just got a presentation because there's quite a lot of content to get through. So we thought that would be the best way of sorting that out. So also just want to make it very clear that this content represents the work of numerous departments across ORC. So strategy's role has been to pull it all together and be able to hopefully communicate the whole package. So we've also got Hugo here as the scientist with the most expertise in this subject matter area. So I'll hand over to Hilary to take us through the presentation.
Sure, of course. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to run through this quick presentation. I think the first few slides we might get through quite quickly because we just covered that with the rest of the science team, but just a bit of a background. And I thought we were going to have it here as well. I could gesticulate, but hopefully you can all see the screen somewhere. Just a bit of a background. So as you know, for some of the region's lakes, there are quite a few management interventions already in place. So the likes of Tomahawk, Lake Hayes, Wakatoto, Lake Johnson, even with some of the aquatic pest programs, these lakes are generally well understood. We know how they work. We know what issues these lakes face, and there are management interventions in place already for them. For some of the other lakes, though, they don't have management plans. And so in 2022, ORC engaged LAMPRO to undertake a scoping exercise to determine whether we need an Otago Lake strategic plan. And LAMPRO produced an Otago Lakes management review report that was presented to the council in late last year. So this presentation today is just going to give a quick overview about Otago Lakes and then a bit more detailed discussion about the recommendations from the LAMPRO report. So I've got Hugo sitting next to me to help with any science questions because I'm not a scientist. Just a point of clarification before we rip into it though is that, just in case there's any confusion about where we sit, the Lakes Management Working Group was established in December following a council meeting where the letter from the PCE was discussed. And that was a real focus around those 3 deep lakes, Whakaturu, Wanaka, Hawaii. This scoping exercise for Otago Lake Strategic Plan, that concept came about well before that and covers all of the region's lakes. So what we're really focusing on is the second bullet point there. We're talking today about all of the region's lakes. We're not talking about just the working group and just the 3 deep lakes. We're talking about all the region's lakes. And so just a bit of an overview. 8 of the region's lakes are monitored. There's 18 sites and 9 of those are deep water sites, which are some of those sites are relatively new. And if you looked at the monitoring data for the lakes, just a snapshot in time and compare that against the North bands, you know, there's a lot of green up there. It makes it look like, you know, most of these lakes are in great condition. There's nothing to worry about. A few there, obviously, that we know that do have some issues, but we just have to remember that this is a snapshot in time. And what really matters is trends. And that's what the science team was talking about just before. Also, just because, and this is me just from what I've learned from the scientists, so excuse me if I say it wrong, incorrectly, is that just because something sits in the A band doesn't mean there's nothing to worry about, because, you know, you can move quite a lot within the A band. And if you start high in the A band and you start to move down the A band, some of these are really, really big lakes. So the amount of impact that must be having and must be occurring onto those lakes to make them move in within the A band, that's quite big. And once that train's in motion, it's quite hard to stop with some of these big lakes. So we can't just look at the A bands and think everything's fine. We have to look at trends and we have to look at that quite closely so we can predict what's happening with some of these lakes. And yeah, I'll just really quickly rush through this because the scientists just talked about it before. But if you look at the trends over 5 years, you're going to see a certain picture. Some stuff looks really good, some improving, some other areas show signs of degradation. Also to note the amount of monitoring sites that we have 5 years worth of data for. And then go to the next one. But then if you look at 10-year, the date trend, you might get a slightly different picture again. Again, some bands, some indicators improving, others showing signs of degradation. But another point to make is that we've now only got 4 sites where we've got longer term data. And then if we look at the 20-year trend again, a slightly different color arrangement again, in terms of, you know, are we improving or is the degradation occurring? And only 3 sites now where we have that long-term trend for the data. So I think what I was just trying to get across there is that we don't, as you know, with any water quality monitoring, we don't just look at the snapshot in time. It's really important to look at the trends, and depending on what length of time you look over, you can get a different story. So that was me trying to do science. So we can do the next slide. But just a bit of a summary in terms of how the science team is responding specifically to lakes is that there has been a massive increase recently in the number of sites that are monitored and the indicators that are monitored. So a lot more of those aquatic plant indicators, a lot of different bands, so that the amount of monitoring, the number of sites, and the different parameters has increased massively over the last few years, because as we saw, you know, previously we didn't have a lot of data, but we're getting more data recently. We all know that there's a lot of work going on in Lake Hayes in terms of management interventions. Waikato and Tomahawk, there has been some ecological assessments, a lot of work going on there as well. And this is new, the ICOLS. Yeah, so this is another science program which is kicking off with regard to lakes, looking at ecological health states of intermittently open and closed coastal lagoons and lakes. So quite a lot going on in the science program in terms of lakes, and we'll talk more later in the presentation about some of the work that's going on around the council in terms of lakes. So back to the LandPro report and the question of, you know, how do we manage lakes, and what is our strategic approach in terms of lakes? So, yep, LandPro was engaged to determine whether a strategic plan was needed. The report was quite large, and in that it noted that the upcoming Land and Water Regional Plan, which is being developed in line with the National Policy Statement, and the catchment action plans, which are being worked on through the ICM program as well, that those two programs of work do have the potential to provide components of a robust management framework for the region's waterways, which include lakes. LandPro did make 43 recommendations in terms of lakes management, and we'll get into those. And so I just want to start by doing a little bit of a refresher on the national policy statement and how that's impacting on how lakes are managed and how water is managed in the region. And then we'll talk about the LandPro recommendations and which of those are actually already being addressed and which ones are not, and where those gaps are, what some recommendations for filling those gaps might look like. So the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, hopefully you've all heard of it. It is prompting a whole lot of work streams for council. The RPS has to be revised to make it in line with the NPS. The regional water plan is being replaced with the land and water regional plan for several reasons, but also to bring it in line with the NPS. The NPS introduces the National Objectives Framework, and it also, NPS also requires that action plans are developed for each ROHI or FMU. And the National Objectives Framework, I'm sure you've all heard of that, but it's really interesting to break it down and look at how that actually works, because the National Objectives Framework itself follows a strategic planning framework. So we're talking about how we're managing lakes and rivers or water in Otago from a strategic perspective. The National Objective Framework already follows a strategic framework. And the reason why I say that is because, and just a quick 101 on how strategic planning works. So I'm sure you've all seen this sort of thing before. Strategic planning works by basically, you set your vision, your goals. This is where you want to get to. You look at where you are now. So what's our existing situation? Where are we now? You make a plan of how to get from where we are now to where we want to get to. You implement that plan. And strategic planning is not a once and done thing. It's a continual process. So you implement your plan to get from here to here. You monitor how you're getting on. And if you don't think that you're making progress in the right direction or fast enough, then you might want to adapt the plan, come back to the plan and adapt it to try and get to where you want to be faster. So here I've provided a diagram of a strategic planning framework, which is the National Objectives Framework. So under the National Objectives Framework, ORC is required by June 2024 to set environmental outcomes for all of the region's waterways. So basically, environmental outcomes is where do we want to get to? That's your vision, your goal, you know, that's where we're going. So that's your start point for your strategic plan. Also by 2024, ORC needs to identify where are we now. So that's baselines. That becomes your baseline, where are we now? And then also set target attribute states. So attribute state is, you know, anything that you would measure in terms of water quality. And those target attribute states will achieve these environmental outcomes. So what's really important to note there as well is the National Policy Statement says that those targets have to be better than, as good as or better than the baseline. So there's no room in the NPS for degradation. It's not permitted essentially under the NPS. So then ORC has to come up with a plan of how to get from here to here. And that plan will include things like rules, levels, limits, resource allocation limits, if we want to get from here to here. And that will require things like consent conditions to be imposed. Also, the NPS requires action plans to be put in place for certain parameters for every FMU or ROHI in the region. And probably when you start to say, right, for different catchments, you need to get from here to here, and here's our plan, that will help you with prioritizing where some of our priorities need to go, some of our resources need to go. Because if you've got something that is, you know, the current baseline is quite a long way away from where we want to be, environmental outcomes, that's probably going to take quite a lot of work. And it's not just ORC having to do this, it's ORC leading the way, but also in support with other parties and collaboration and any kind of support that ORC can provide for other people who are working in the space as well. And then it's ORC's job to monitor those plans to see how we're getting on in terms of, you know, we've made a plan for how to get here to here. How's it going? And the NPS requires, through the National Objectives Framework, that if these water bodies are showing signs of degradation, that ORC needs to come and revise the plan and maybe take a bit more action or put a bit more priority in terms of what's being done to get from here to here. So that's me trying to explain the National Objectives Framework, why it fits a strategic planning framework. And so another body of work, which is also ORC is heavily involved in, is these catchment action plans. So for each catchment, ORC is developing action plans which will include the lakes which are within those catchments. These are being done on a FMU or ROHI scale. So there's going to be lots of action plans that are coming out soon. LandPro was concerned that some of these catchment action plans might be a little bit high level, that if you've got lakes within a catchment or within an FMU or ROHI, that some of these action plans might be too high level to catch the specific needs of those lakes. But there's nothing to stop ORC from doing sub-catchment plans as well, if needed. You know, if we say that a particular lake needs a particular management approach, which is different or, you know, unique to the rest of the FMU or ROHI. Okay, so LandPro's recommendations. LandPro made a recommendation for a strategy for lakes management, and their strategy was basically to address 43 recommendations. So we've spent some time talking with different council departments about who's actually doing what in terms of these recommendations, which of these recommendations are already being addressed, which of them are not being addressed, which of them will be addressed soon, and where are there big gaps, really, in terms of how lakes are managed for the region. And what we found was that around about half of the recommendations that LandPro made, work's already underway, either they've already been addressed or work's already underway to address those. For about a third of them, there's not any work really specifically underway, or, you know, there is some work underway, but it could actually, you know, be prioritized, or we could be doing more in that space because these are quite important gaps. And through that process, we've identified 4 programs of work that we've recommended really should be given some extra priority if we're going to be managing the region's lakes better. Just a little snippet on some of the work that's already underway. So this is a very, very brief snippet because it's all in that appendix 2 of that paper. There's a whole lot of information in there about what the different departments are up to. But work that is already underway is that ORC is already implementing essentially strategic plans for each FMU or ROHI through the National Objectives Framework. So for each FMU ROHI, there will be a vision, environmental outcome set, we'll determine where we are, make a plan for how to get from here to here, monitor it and adapt accordingly. And again, no degradation is allowed in that. There will be policies and rules applied at a higher resolution than what there was under the land and water, the regional water plan, because a lot of these rules and policies, I understand, are going to be at a FMU or ROHI scale, whereas previously it was like at a regional scale only. So we're going to get some more specific plans and rules coming through. Environmental data, so, you know, LandPro said that some of the data is not very accessible, but council is pretty much nearing the completion of the Aquarius project, and that's all available on the website now. So that's making a lot of the environmental data a lot more readily accessible to more people. SOE reporting, there were suggestions that say when that comes out, it's not really easy to be understood by many people. And so the teams have been working on making that presented in a format that more people can pick it up and understand it. And as I touched on earlier, the monitoring that is being undertaken in our region's lakes has increased massively recently. So there's a lot more information in attachment 2 to the paper. That's just a really brief snapshot about some work that's underway. So where were the gaps? And right, so touched right when I first started talking, I know that for some of the region's lakes, they are well understood. We know what their issues are, and we know how to what management interventions are going to make a difference. But for some of the region's lakes, we don't have that level of understanding. And the three obvious ones are the three deep lakes. So why is that important? If these lakes are in band A and they start to move through band A, turning around that train once it's in progress is going to be pretty hard. These are big lakes. So if they do start to degrade, that's going to be a big ship to try and turn around. Also, the National Objective Frameworks ORC has to identify where do we want to be, where are we now? Okay, we need to make a plan for how to get to here. You can't manage something if you don't understand it. So it's well recognized or accepted that we don't have a really good understanding about how these three big lakes operate or what management interventions might make a big difference. There are some obvious interventions, but to be really sure about what you're doing to try and make a difference and what impact that's going to have, we definitely need a bit more understanding, a bit better level of understanding about that. So that's one gap. Another one is a stocktake of the different agencies that are working in these individuals, in these ROHI or FMUs. Lamprey identified that a lot of people are not quite sure who's out there, who's supposed to be doing what and whose job it is. So we're just helping our communities to understand who's doing what. But through that stocktake exercise, it's also a great opportunity to look at opportunities for collaboration, look at if there's any overlap between what different people are doing, or even, are there gaps? Is there work out there that needs to be done that's not being done? So it's really like a mapping exercise of who's out there doing what. That work will be done eventually through the ICM program, but if that was to be expedited and undertaken a bit quicker, then I think there's potentially some really opportunities that could come out of that in terms of how our waterways are managed better. The aquatic pest management program, so this does tend to be up in those upper catchments. So, the three deep lakes and Dunstan, for example, where there is some aquatic pest work already being undertaken. But when Lamprey went out to the community, a lot of the feedback was people still didn't really know who's supposed to be out there doing what and what are they actually doing. And my understanding from talking to staff is that, Lindsay's out there doing a lot of work, but maybe the reporting on that could be made more readily available. There is an annual HUI where they report to the community, but my understanding is there isn't a really good kind of comprehensive report that comes from that can be disseminated more readily. Also, probably more regular check-ins against the objectives in the regional pest management plan to see that all this work's been undertaken. How is that making progress towards the objectives in the regional pest management plan, and are we still on track? So that could be a good kind of stocktake exercise to undertake at this point in time. And the enhanced land use mapping piece. So the scientists talked a little bit briefly earlier about what kind of land use activities can have an impact on water quality. And it's not just about watching what's happening in our rivers and then trying to guess where it's coming from. It's also about looking what's happening in our catchments and then trying to predict how that's going to impact on our waterways and rivers and waterways as well. So the science team have already been doing some mapping exercises, looking at land use activities in the catchment and trying to predict, is that going to have an impact on water quality? But the resolution isn't there yet. So for example, I can't remember exactly which catchment it was, but it was in one of the three deep lakes, and the land use change over time showed a lot more land going from agriculture into conservation land. And you would immediately think, great, better outcomes for water quality. But if the same stocking units are just now condensed into a smaller area, then that's probably not going to be the case. So we don't have that level of resolution, but with more rules coming through now, in terms of things like winter grazing and farm management plans, we'll get a better understanding about what's going on where and how that's changed over time. And that can help with predicting, water quality outcomes and doing something about it before that train sets off in motion. So that was another piece of work that, you know, if the council had the appetite to resource it better, I think that there could be some great outcomes from that and some opportunities in terms of better management of our lakes. So conclusion, sorry, that was all a bit fast, but the national policy statement has really introduced a fundamental change in the way that fresh water is managed, and we through that national objectives framework and the fact that no further degradation is going to be tolerated. ORC's responsibility to ensure that the regional policy statement and land and water regional plan are delivered on time and to the required standards. You know, that's a really big body of work. You know, so if we're talking about where priorities sit, delivering those two instruments so that they can be fully effective is really, really important. And through those NPS as well, we've got the National Objectives Framework, which is already a strategic approach to managing water quality for the regions. And so, you know, the recommendation is to really do those things really, really well. You've already got a strategic framework, which is already being rolled out. You're going to be getting higher level of policies and rules coming through, which are going to be at a more pertinent to some of those key lakes. But we have identified those 4 gaps where, you know, if council had the appetite to resource those, could make a big difference as well and provide some opportunities for better management of lakes. Because ultimately, the NPS requires that water quality is maintained or improved. So that's quite a big challenge. I think I'm done.
That's awesome. Thank you, Hilary. That's a very full rundown for us, which is ideal. So, yeah, well done. So I think what we'll do with this one, we'll do questions first, points of clarity, and then we can go into debate because there's a few decisions to make on this one. So that'll be awesome. So anybody got any questions? Yes, Tim.
I understand this report was kicked off as a result of the concern that the Commissioner of the Environment had in the first place. Our lakes, is that right, or was that underway at the time?
This piece of work was kicked off well before that.
Okay. So, in the process of this work, did the report actually confirm the concerns from the Commissioner of the Environment?
There's a lot of information in the Land Pool report about the states of those 3 lakes, which were of through the chair.
Yep.
That there was a particular focus of the commissioner, and you know, but a lot of that is just the same information that you get from the science team.
Just a subsequent question. So the work that we're actually doing in establishing FMUs and the work we're doing on the land and water management plan, you see that as fitting into the response to the concerns around the quality of water of those lakes? Is there any more that we have to do, or is it sort of being caught up in what we're already doing?
So through the chair, we've identified those 4 gaps as something that probably needs extra resourcing. And you know, when you look at those 4 priority actions or 4 actions to fill the gaps, you know, the first one was around the 3 deep lakes, and it's not that those 4 actions were favoriting those big lakes. It's that that's where the gaps exist.
Thank you, Alexa.
Kia ora, Hilary. There's been a lot of work in this undergoing, and a lot of these things, especially those 4 gaps, have been talked about for some years around this council. And I think possibly at some level of frustration, last year a lakes management working group was set up. And what I'm seeing in here, if we can actually start working to these recommendations, would we have a need for that group as well, or any particular Otago Lakes strategy, or is it fitting inside this whole piece, which I think it is? I think you can refer to something like that at some point.
Through the chair, the conclusion is that there doesn't need to be a separate strategy specifically for lakes. We're already rolling out strategic approaches for each FMU, Rohi, through the National Objectives Framework. in terms of whether or not you need the working group, I probably shouldn't comment on that. I think that's beyond what I was contracted to do. But the paper that accompanies this recommends that that could be a focus for the working group, is those 3 deep lakes, because that is really where there's a lot of gaps.
If I was Alexa, so that there is, you'll note, there is a recommendation in there around the working group, and it's focused on the 3 deep lakes, and I guess the opportunity that's been identified is as a result of the letter from the Parliamentary Commissioner and some interest from MFE in that issue, because they also received the same letter, is to have that group focus on that and potentially with a joint project with MFE, specifically around filling some of the knowledge gaps we've got, which then speaks to one of the 4 priorities that were identified in that report. So that's where the recommendations have, and I think the distinction there around those 3 lakes is where we can generate that MFE interest and potentially, not confirmed, but potentially co-investment to start filling some of these science gaps that we've got.
And some of the funding gaps that perhaps might exist as well. Yeah, it generally makes really good sense to me to do that, I think. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Evan?
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned that the percentage of grazed land has decreased and conservation land has increased. What's that related to, the tenure review process? Do you understand the mechanics behind that?
Through the chair, I think it might have been, but I can't confirm that. Sorry, I'd have to ask Ben Mackey.
Yeah, well,
I can't remember. It was, I think it might have been Monica, but yeah. Sorry, it was a vague example.
Very interesting.
Can I have one more?
Sure.
Sorry about that. I was just trying to find my place back in here. But with the lakes working group, if it concentrated on the 3, so lakes like Lake Hayes, Dunstan, Tuakitoko would end up within the more general framework. And so my question is, will this more general framework be focused enough to uphold the sort of work that we're envisaging for those other Otago lakes?
So through the chair, for those 3 deep lakes, there's just it's widely agreed that we don't understand them very, very well. For Hayes, Dunstan, Tuakitoto, my understanding is that they are reasonably well understood, and they're very different types of lakes as well. The National Objectives Framework, what that requires of ORC is no further degradation, so that would apply to every lake in the region, not just the ones that we've named today as well.
And the one last question, that's slightly different, is that with the degradation of those lakes, how is that measured in terms of lag times? How are lag times coped with in that framework? No further degradation, and you might have 50 years of nitrogen still to come through.
Yeah, so are you talking specifically about the upper lakes?
No, I'm not actually. No, not at all. But in any lakes, in any waterways, if we have to not allow further degradation, how do we manage that given the lag times?
With lake, it's a bit more complex, because you can stop, all the nutrient inputs into lakes, but you have a massive delay in response because there is internal cycles as well. So sometimes you would have to have a combined approach on I always whenever you want to restore a lake, the main contribution that you're going to get is stopping further input of nutrients. And then these, you're going to see the effect, down the road. But also if you want to see a faster response, so you're going to have to have in lake restoration measures, and as an example, we've considered that for Lake Hayes. We've had some scientists involved, to come up with some ideas of what would be the best management strategies for Lake Hayes. And one of the options was the augmentation of Lake Hayes, bringing more water, so you could have kind of flushing the lake a little bit, and these, associated with, stopping the addition of new nutrient coming in, then you would see a faster response. And those things, I think, when you're writing a plan, you know, for improving, you have to take into consideration of all of those variables. Yeah.
So there is accounting for that within the national objectives framework, for the lag times.
If I can help, it's not necessarily in the north, but in the environment court, the courts have determined that, and there's a case, Ngāti Kahungunu in the North Island, where they said if you're doing all the actions but not yet seeing the results, you're still considered to be giving effect to the MPS and halting degradation. So it's just a piece of law that says we're mindful that lag times exist,
right,
and you won't necessarily see what's happening.
Thanks, thank you.
Any other questions for clarification?
Yeah, just on your collection of data and knowledge, and you say we don't know much about these three lakes, but is there not other studies about that have been done? The University of Otago has been doing over time a considerable amount of work on those three lakes. So where are we about collecting or understanding the data that has been done?
Yeah, it's not as much as we'd like to. It's far away. Still like to have. We actually never had a big project on those lakes that would look at different angles and different things, you know. And nowadays, with the advancements of climate change and things like these, we have to start looking at different perspectives and things that could be influencing that we didn't consider before as well, when you look at those older studies that were undertaken there. So we are improving our monitoring and our capability of acquired data from those lakes. And well, as an example, recently we've had the addition of lake buoys, which are having continuous monitoring on those lakes. And those will help like to develop models and understand what the impacts are, you know, but we really need like a more fine scale study to understand the complexity of those lakes. When we say that, I think I don't know if everybody was here, but I think it was last year, I presented a paper talking about the lake buoys, but I also showed that for the first time, we changed our lakes program in 2017, and was because the way that the monitoring program was, we were literally collecting samples from the outlets, and then we were not actually having samples from the lake itself. So now we have mid-lake samplings, and we have like a finer resolution on our state of the environment program. And for the first time, we are reporting on those big lakes that there is degrading trends. And before, with our long-term data that we've had, we couldn't capture that. So you can see that chlorophyll, it's still, I have to emphasize that the trend that we have is a short-term trend. You know, we only have 5 years worth of data, so we have to be cautious about it. You know, could be climate variabilities. There are other aspects that could be influenced that degrading trend as well, but we don't know because we don't actually have studies in place to show that those variabilities are influencing, you know, and understanding the complexity of like algal change as well. And for a long time, we were limited with lab analysis as well, because the level of nutrients in those waters are so low that we couldn't even capture for a long time. So maybe 15 years of our program, we are pretty much just like below detection limit, you know, and now we have trace analysis where we can see that, you know, within those very tiny changes, how this is affecting somehow the lake. And then we can see issues as well with like introduced species like with lake snow and the big lakes. And we just don't know much about the ecology of the algae as well. So there are a lot of things that we need to understand better to better manage those lakes. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, your question?
I'm just wondering those stuff that those four like missing pieces, those actions that we want to do in addition to our existing work programs, that would mean we wouldn't need a lake strategy per se. Does staff need direction from us to go ahead with those? So those may come back to us at some point. What's the process with that?
Through the chair, yes, that would be useful. So it fits nicely in with incorporating those into the LTP future state conversation. So
Yeah.
Should.
Is there
Yeah,
anything?
I was just wondering if that,
Hmm.
anything else? Or it's cool.
Michael, do you have a question of clarification?
I do. Can I ask it?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I was just going to ask you about the 4. When you do the 4, presumably you'll bring a paper to us of the 4 bits that are missing, or that you think we can improve ourselves on. That is to go into or inform the long-term plan. Yeah. So will that come back as a separate piece of work this year, or will it go into next year? That's my first question.
Sorry.
No.
Through the chair, so we can provide more detail. Obviously, in this paper, we have described what those 4 bodies of work are, but not costed them or gone into a whole lot of detail. So I'm sure that detail can be provided if that's required.
Well, it's just that I'd like to move a motion to that effect, actually, because some of those things are actually quite complex and require some good degree of discussion. I'd like them to happen this year, not next year when we're under the pressure of the long-term plan, if that's possible, Mr. Chair. So just flagging that. The second question I have is E. coli. I look at Lake Dunstan, for example, but it's, I suppose it's no different in some ways than other lakes. And we get E. coli measurements, and I'm starting to think ducks, and particularly duck shooting season and geese and all those sorts of stuff. Do we measure actually the source of the E. coli?
Only in our contact recreation program.
Sorry?
We only measure the source of E. coli in our contact recreation program, or if it becomes a big issue as well, and then we can investigate further if there is a site that, it's constantly showing high levels of E. coli, we can, and then it comes to a pollution hotline, we will investigate as well and run some fecal source tracking.
Yes, because that would appear a gap, just quietly, Lloyd. Because sometimes when we see E. coli, we automatically assume that there's some farm has done something wrong when ducks and geese and the occasional Irish freedom camper are the cause. Is there no way that we can actually start to break down those E. coli's into causes? Because it would also inform us better in terms of policy making.
Is there a question there?
Yeah, so that question around is there no way, I mean, that comes back to the level of service discussion and I guess relates to Tom's comments in the previous papers around a review of our overall monitoring program and starting to bring some options back to council with some extrapolated costs around, well, if we wanted to do more monitoring along the lines of what you've raised, Michael, and either in across our whole program or in dedicated sites, then there'll be an order of costs and a decision to be made. So something that was flagged as part of science and environmental monitoring, joint review of that monitoring is something that council will need to make some decisions on during the long-term plan.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So we're still on questions for clarity. Given me.
So if we move the recommendations as it is, I understand that clause 88 will come into action, which is the financial considerations, which says that 4 priority actions will be reviewed, prioritised and costed for the relevant departments as at the 24-34 long-term plan, and should funding be identified within the recently approved 23-24 budget, work to undertake those actions will be expedited. So by moving now, it doesn't actually slow the process down for the long-term plan, but it does actually speeds it up if there is actual money available. Yeah.
That's not really a question.
No, I think it's an important clarification Kevin's made though, because I think it recognises that these 4 actions have been identified as priorities. And so what we're saying is if we do, we've got a large budget and it is stretched, but through the year, if we find that there is funding available to move quicker on these, we shouldn't wait for an approved long-term plan and subsequent funding to get some of these things underway, given they've been highlighted to us as priorities for our lakes management.
So just subsequent, so therefore we would not necessarily need a change of motion, that the motions, the 6 recommendations would suffice to do that. And if that's the case, then I'd be happy to move those 6.
I'm, this is a question for Richard, and I'm nervous about this approach in that previous discussion we've had, and that we haven't actually clarified yet who pays for this. And there seems to be a fundamental thought that this would just be perhaps generally rated. And considering we're going to a long-term plan, I'm not saying it shouldn't be. We all love our lakes. We absolutely love them. But we also need to make sure that we're setting principles up for a rating system that's fair. And I'm just, so on that basis that you may, and so the question for you is, are you confident that should we go down this and find some money, maybe out of general rates, it's surplus, we started that work, we can still have a healthy, good debate that's fair and frank about who pays? Okay. Cool. It's will need strong question. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at, I think Kevin's highlighted, is it clause 3 of the recommendations, Kevin?
That's what he was asking questions about.
Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't actually say that we're going to do it this year.
No, but if you go to financial considerations, which is clause 88 on page 368 of the computer version, which is probably 366 of yours, you'll see that that's what I'm referring. That's why I've asked all that, and that moving of those motions, will that enact that financial considerations, which says if we've got the money, we'll crack into it.
But I'm concerned if we don't have the money, we won't, Kevin.
Yeah, but also in the long-term plan.
Yeah, but then that's next year. And then we don't know if we're going to be doing it at all. It'll come up for review during the long-term plan.
Hang on, we're just going into debate now.
Yep. I'd like to move those, all, whatever it is, 6 of them.
Happy to second.
Thanks. And we can go into debate. Yeah.
Thank you. So move Rachel second, Kevin, and we can now go on to debate.
Thanks. Can I talk then?
You want to take?
And you can have your
Thank
first
you.
crack at it. Yes.
So yeah, first of all, just wanted to say that it has been really good having a lakes working group. We have done quite a few things. We have actually raised, do we need to have a lake strategy now? Because we all care about all of the lakes across Otago. I think the report identified we've got 700 odd lakes. There's a lot of them. And taking a strategic approach is obviously important. But then as we got into it, we started to think, how are we best to do that, given that we have got the new freshwater planning framework, which starts off at community level with identifying a vision and really wants to see community input all the way through, with us facilitating, there's a whole lot of inputs we have from developing the policy with community through to facilitating those catchment action plans as well. And for us to jump in right now and try and do that process doesn't work, because we would be taking that opportunity away from the community. But, and also in having the discussion, we also talked to Mark Schellenberger, who's probably he's done a lot of work in these lakes. We've also talked internally about what we're doing as well. We've gathered a lot of info. Where this group came from was when we received a letter from the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment saying, hello guys, you've got a trend of deteriorating of increasing chlorophyll A in your inland deep lakes. What's going on? What are you doing about that? And we don't know at this point whether that is actually degradation or is it, is it climatic? What's actually going on? These are massive lakes. We've got lake buoys. We're doing a bit more. It's still not enough to actually understand that situation. It requires more. And we talked about that with people like Mark, and we talked about it internally. And that's the priorities. But as we've said, we've also talked to MFE. This is a joint issue because these lakes are national taonga. They are gems, they're treasures for our whole country. Everyone's worried if we do. First of all, we've got increasing chlorophyll A. We're still really, really pristine, but we don't want that to continue, we think. Or is it natural? We don't know. We want to know because they're really crucial, these lakes. If we don't have enough information, we don't know how to monitor them. We don't know whether the actions we put in place are the right ones, and that's with our community. So whatever we do, we're not going to take these lakes out of the community needing to do plans, and they've already got a lot underway too. But can we at this moment move something forward so that we can attract some resources, hopefully, or do it ourselves, do some thinking about how would we best provide some more information there so that we can make the right decisions. As Hilary said, you can't manage something that you don't understand. And it's not okay that we don't understand these national gems. So that's where we're at. And I think these 6 recommendations all make a lot of sense.
Thank you. Michael, have you still got your hand up from last time?
No, I've got a fresh hand.
A fresh hand, that's good, thanks. Your turn now, Michael.
Obviously, I'm a bit of an activist on this, and I'm disappointed that we're making progress so slowly. It seems to be the nature of the beast, and I'm not going to get upset about that. But it seems that when we've got 4 simple things to do, because we just don't know enough, actually, as Gretchen's pointed out, and they are to improve our understanding of the 3 deep lakes, stocktake agencies, groups and other stakeholders within each FMU, definitely further consider our aquatic management program because it's not working, and enhance land use mapping, issues that have been identified. It would be dreadful if we were to leave this another year into the long-term plan process and then potentially any one of these 4 things to fall off because other things will be prioritised potentially. I mean, I look at these resolutions and I have to say I don't think resolution 3 is strong enough. I think that we should be seeking to address those issues in this financial year so that we may inform the long-term plan, not have some of these potentially starting in 2024, 25, or even to the never, 25, 26 and onwards. So I would like to make sure that the 4 actions that are currently under active consideration are in active consideration this financial year, and that reports are produced on such this financial year. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Alan?
Thank you. Look, this makes sense to me. I think this report convinces me that the best way of managing most of our lakes is through our existing catchment-based programs. And of course, some special attention needed to those 3 deep lakes. And I see recommendation 5 notes that recently established lakes management working group focus on those deep lakes and also seek to establish a joint work program with other agencies, which I can see is going to be very helpful. So that looks all good to me. Thank you. And there is urgency around that. I understand that, as Michael makes that point.
Okay.
There is urgency for this, and I'm glad that you have supported having a balanced budget that may give us some extra money, Michael, to invest in this project, because my memory is that you didn't want us to have in a budget quite as much money as we did have. So it may be very good that we have put that in there, and it's great to have that support. But what I am nervous about is that on the hoop we are setting potentially a problem up on priority and funding streams. And I'm just noting that because if we say this comes out potentially, and I appreciate you're all over this, Richard, but if it comes out of a general rate and we decide the quantum of the work actually requires a targeted, even partly targeted rate, that is a really hard thing to do later. And that, so appreciate the urgency, but on the hoof decisions to support something out of a fund that we haven't done, that critical thinking about how you rate for it is important.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Lloyd. Yeah, supportive of all the motions. Thank you for the management review report. I think it's important that we acknowledge Don Robertson, chair of Lakes Guardians, or the Lake Hawea and Lake Wanaka Guardians. It was Don who came along to us, spoke to us several years ago, but he has, I suppose, kept us honest in this space. And I think it's really important that he and no doubt a number of other passionate lake advocates that are part of those organisations up there that have stayed connected with us. And I like to think that, you know, we are going to deliver on this, and they will certainly keep their faith in the organisation. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. We have Gary and then Alexa.
Yeah, thank you. Look, totally supportive as well. It's great to see that we have moved over, I suppose, the last 8 or 9 years from a position of not wanting to support any monitoring, no monitoring buoys, to actually now recognising the need for this. I think it is sensible to just focus on the 3 and maybe then be able to be part of a nationwide direction that may assist with some funding. If we don't have funding for this ready, we are going to have it in place. So that will be a concern. We have to have a balanced budget, but then we have to meet these critical work streams as well. For all 3 of these lakes, you know, we have massive urban intensification developments all alongside them and in their catchments. So, you know, they are under pressure. We have to understand where the issues are coming from and what we can do. So, no, I'm supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Tim? Oh, sorry, Alexa, sorry.
I think this is really important. Thank you, Andrew, for acknowledging Don. There are a lot of people as well as Don, but Don has really been a leader in this space, but many other people have been urging us to look at the 3 Great Lakes for a long, long time. And in fact, all of our lakes in the whole region. And I'm happy that this program is what's suggested here. What was it, option, whatever it was, the main 1-3, I think, that brings in the recommendations and the 4 extra actions. Happy to do that. I really support the idea of having the working group to oversee the 3 Great Lakes in particular and to look at ways of bringing that into a national focus. And I really want to see us make sure that we prioritise this in our long-term plan. This is, you know, water comes up as the priority all the time. This is where it starts. Well, it started in lots of things, but it's where it's the headwaters. It's really, really important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. We have Tim.
Yes, I support these recommendations too. I do understand the need for urgency, but also recognise that the work is underway. Also that this is not sort of mutually exclusive. The Land Water Management Plan and all the other work of the council is already sort of looking at this sort of thing. I agree with Kate. I think it needs to be costed out properly. There needs to be proper planning around it. It should be in the long-term plan.
Well, thank you, Tim. Kevin?
Yeah, probably my key to this is, yes, it does need to be funded out correctly, but also this is an absolute opportunity to get a hold of the Ministry of Environment to see where they want to contribute and work and partner with us, because it has been highlighted as a very important and it is exceptionally important. We all tend to look at agricultural pollution as we go along, but if we have a look at that, you know, I've recently played golf up in that area, and what used to be a rather extensively farmed piece of land is now covered in houses and golf courses and more houses and more houses and more houses. So, and when we look at the population going from, I think the census in the Queensland Lakes was 39,000, now it's up to 49, close to 50,000. I wonder where the real impact on that lake is actually coming from. So really great to be able to understand and to get this work underway to see how we can ensure the safety and the purity of our lakes. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Edward, would you like to speak?
Do you want to say anything? We've got, there's the chance to say something. If you want to say something here, there's a couple that haven't.
Certainly, those three deep lakes are true tolerant to our people. In fact, there are significant gaps in the information which we've heard from the report, and thanks for that very thorough report. Certainly support the recommendations and that we have get a better understanding of those issues related to the lakes and what might be contributing to the deterioration. So, yeah, supportive of the recommendations.
Thank you very much. So let's give Gretchen.
I just wanted to recognise and perhaps suggest a small change maybe, although it might be in there, that the number 5 about the Lakes Working Group and working with other stakeholders, does it say that? Is it number 5? Yeah, seek to establish a joint program. I think it's appropriate, and we'd always envisaged that mana whenua would be on the working group with us. And Edward has indicated to me that he would be happy to join the group. So just that it's, I guess, inherent that the group includes Edward, who's now with us in this committee as well. And I'm not sure if we need to specifically write that down, but yeah, that's the intention. Yeah.
I think we're happy to leave it as it is. Otherwise,
I'm happy to do that as a subsequent motion.
Yeah.
We do it as a subsequent motion.
I think, yeah.
I think it's a good idea too.
Should be all right.
I prefer to do it as a secondary motion. Liz.
Okay.
So I think we've all had, we've been around the table, so I would just like to put all the recommendations as per the report. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your good debate and, you know.
And the only, yeah, I think we do put subsequent, it isn't part of this motion. The question, can I ask one question before I put that, is should it be you and someone from the who've given the, from the Southern iwi, because of the interest and support, I'm not quite sure, because I don't want to limit it just to Edward if it's more important.
Well, you could word it so that it's a mana whenua.
Yeah, or two. Yeah, I'm happy to see an amendment. Sorry, an addition. Sorry, a motion. Sorry, it's not an addition. Motion that Edward Allison as co-chair of this committee and another mana whenua rep if assist in the Lakes Management Working Group. The members of the Lakes Management Working Group. I'd be very kind if they were available to do that.
Do we have a seconder for that motion?
Yeah.
Seconded Alexa. Any debate?
Yeah.
Michael?
Who's on the working group? So who are the ORC representatives?
You are
Alexa
and Gretchen.
Okay, so it'll be 4 of us.
Maybe 5.
And also the chief executive.
Yeah, and also we need to, there has been interest from MFE in joining that group. So once we've established, once these have now been passed, we'll work to get that group together with the members listed today, plus some others who have expressed an interest.
So do we need to list all the names for purposes of clarification?
Done that previously.
Yeah, we've done that before.
I know, but I'm just asking. Well, yes, well, no. The job of the Lakes Working Group was to come to here It's made its report. This is it. So this is something new.
Sorry, I'm lost in a minute.
Kate's done her subsequent motions.
Okay, we're going to put the motion. We're just getting. And we're going to put the motion up on the board so everybody can see it. Hopefully. Awesome. So the motion is just coming up on, hopefully, on the screen. Any second now. We have it. So the motion.
Councillor Bibbs, Edward Ellis, invites Edward Ellison and potentially one other mana whenua representative to be included in the working party for the Otago Lakes Management Group. It should be rather than approach. Yeah. Working group, sorry. Oh, working group, sorry, it's my fault. I think I should.
The Otago Lakes Management.
We just said that's two.
You don't give them attention.
Well, it's one is it's G.
Two and one other.
Yeah.
So just the potential.
I know.
Make the potential.
Oh, sorry, and one other. Yeah, sorry, yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
We can invite.
And invite. I don't. Yeah, I did.
Accept.
Before I had requests, and I'd hate putting a burden upon people, so that's why.
So the motion is put that the council invites Edward Ellison and one other mana whenua rep to be included in the Otago Lakes working.
We just changed invites to approves.
Approves. That's what we
Got to invite because there's nothing invited.
Oh, has to, no, we do invite, yeah, sorry. We do invite them.
I don't want to be a duty.
Any further discussion around that motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Hilary and Hugo and Andrea. It's been an awesome presentation, and we actually had we had really good debate as well, well-controlled debate. So I'd like to thank councillors for their input there as well. So that's it's really good, and it's really good to see that we're making progress so that we can actually make sure that our Tonga lakes are cared for and looked after, and we know exactly what's happening there. So that brings our meeting to an end.
20 minutes earlier than you
20
thought.
minutes-
Well done.
20 minutes earlier, 20 minutes late. Yeah. So thank you all very much for your participation. I'd just like to close with a quote here.
Kia tai ki tātou katoa, e te whai tō tātou ariki a ku kraiti, e te ahua o te atua me te whiwhinga, tahi tei ki te waira taku, ake ake, ame. Kia ora.
Thank you very much. Safe travel.